Good morning, everyone. Thanks for waiting. I'm going to ask some questions of you before we really get started, just to sort of see where you're at and what you know. First, I'm Jennifer. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay and you're good? Okay. In the chat as well. So I'm monitoring the chat. Thank you. Hi, Yana. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Mark. Thank you. So I'm Jennifer Smith Richards, and I'm a reporter at the Chicago Tribune. Technically, I'm a data reporter, which doesn't really mean anything. It means I work with data on the investigative team to find stories and tell stories and explain how systems and people have harmed vulnerable people across Illinois, mostly. I do a lot of work in schools and in education reporting. So I'm self-taught. I'm not a computer programmer, nothing fancy. I use Google Sheets and Excel a lot. I also, I code and I program in R. But I got my start, learning Excel. So I'm going to ask you guys a few questions about what you already know so that I don't bore the heck out of you. Okay. And if you can just keep communicating with me in the chat, that will be really helpful. Okay. So how many of you have used Excel before or Google Sheets, either one? Okay, great. So let's try to gauge your comfort level. How many of you know how to sort and filter in a spreadsheet? Okay, good. So some of you, okay. Great. Then let's start there. So what I want to do is walk you through some basic things that you can do in spreadsheets, whether that's Excel or Google Sheets. And we'll start with sorting and filtering. And I'll sort of skip over the, how spreadsheets work and how tabular data works. So I dropped, and I'll drop again in the chat, kind of my notes. And these are on my GitHub page. What you'll see is this is a link that goes to something called Pivot to Excel. And it's sort of an intermediate class that takes you up through pivot tables. And if we have time today, that would be great if we could get to it. But there's also a refresher, a link at the top of the page to Excel 101, which is, kind of the very beginning, of what you need to know to work in a spreadsheet. So we're going to use that. And I'm also going to drop some practice data because I'm hoping that you're going to be working along with me. Let me know if you don't have access to this Google Drive. There are 3 spreadsheets there. And we're going to start practicing in one of them first. What I would ask is that you make a copy of this data. We're going to start with the Chicago White Sox roster. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that you can see what I'm looking at. Give me some thumbs up if you can see this well. Okay, thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jana. Okay. We're going to start with this Chicago White Sox roster. I've already made a copy. And if you open it up, if you make a copy and open up on your screen, you'll see a few fields here, a few columns. I think I probably grabbed this last year, so I don't know if it's current, but let's pretend that it is. I want to just do a quick refresher on some basic math functions that are helpful in spreadsheets. And again, these are transferable between Excel and Google Sheets. The functions are mostly the same. So you should be able to swap back and forth depending on what you use in your newsrooms. We'll start with just a reminder for those of you who don't, and a first time information for those of you who don't know, that Excel is very literal. Spreadsheets are very literal in that you're going to tell this spreadsheet what to do and where to do it. And here's what I mean. Let's say, just for fun, that we wanted to know the combined weight of the entire team. You can see we have a weight column here. It's WT. We can do this. We could get out our calculator, right, and add everything up, but that's silly. We could do this by going to the bottom of the column here. The signal that you want to do something in a column to Excel or to Google Sheets is the equal sign. That means I want you to do something. And now we're going to tell it what we want it to do, which is sum. So you're going to type in sum. And Google Sheets is helpfully suggesting the next step, which is where do I want to do this? And you can see that it's highlighted the cells. Is everybody comfortable with kind of telling Google Sheets where to do things? You understand how the cells work. Like this is cell G2, right? Column G, row 2. So down here, where we've done this sum formula, we've done equal sum, and then we want it to sum cells G2 through G29. So that colon, just a reminder, means through in Excel. Okay. All right. Will you guys holler at me in the chat if I'm telling you too much that you don't want to hear, please? All right. So that's sum. And let's just quickly, similar thing works for average. Let's say we want to know the average weight, right, of this roster. Same thing. We're going to go into a cell below this column where weight lives and do equal, right? We want you to do this function. The function we want is, average. And we can helpfully see that, thanks Google Sheets, it's saying, hey, do you want to average cells G2 through G29? And that's all of our data in that column. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that and say yes. And now we know the average weight. Okay. So basic math, spreadsheets are great for that. Let's do a very, very fast filter and sort. And I think this will be easy. This is a relatively small data set. Should be pretty easy to understand. Okay, so I'm going to show you my standard convention, okay, for every time I sort and filter. I will go up to this upper left-hand corner and select the entire spreadsheet. Works the same in Excel. And the reason that I do this is I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing to the spreadsheet, I'm doing to all the data that's included there and not just some of the data. It's especially important when you have a larger data set that you can't visually see the whole thing for. So that's always my first step. All right, let's do a filter. There are lots of ways in Google Sheets, just as there are in Excel, to get to a filter, but I'm going to show you the fastest way and the one that I use. And that is to wander over here to this thing that looks like a funnel and click it. And you'll see what's happened is all these little drop-down triangles have appeared. Let's say that in this case, I want to be able to see only catchers. So I'm going to click on that drop-down. I'm going to come down and say, hey, clear, uncheck all of these, because I only want to see catcher. And I'm going to make sure that catcher has a check mark next to it, and then press OK. Give me a thumbs up if that worked for you, please. Okay. I just want to make sure you're with me and I'm not ahead of you. All right. Good deal. So to remove a filter, we can go back and change it. We could select other things. We could say, no, I want to see infielders now. Right. To remove a filter, super easy. I'm going to go back up and just uncheck the funnel. So that's filtering. That's a way to temporarily, right, see just a select amount of your data. Let's quickly sort. All right. So sorting is something that you want when you want to see smallest to largest, largest to smallest, A to Z, Z to A, based on a column. So same thing as filter. I always go over and select all of my data at once. And if you are curious where I'm clicking, it's up here in the upper left-hand corner of the spreadsheet where the rows and columns meet. That will automatically select everything. Okay. To sort in Google Sheets, you go to Data. You could just select one of these things, but I'm going to show you a more controlled way to sort and to make sure that you're sorting exactly what you want to sort. So you're going to hover over Sort Range and then select Advanced Range Sorting Options. All right, here's why I like to do this. Because I can make sure that the spreadsheet's going to do exactly what I tell it to. I want to tell it my data has a header row. That header row is where all the field names are, the column names. And then I can be very intentional about what I want to sort. In this case, let's just stick with weight. And we go down and select the weight column. I want to know who weighs the most. So I'm going to sort Z to A. So that's in descending order, largest to smallest. And I can click OK, sort. And you can see that what Sheets has done is reordered our data by weight, exactly as we told it to, from most heaviest weight to lightest weight. Right. In your newsroom, is there a reason you would really want to do this particular sort? No, probably not. To go back a step, just as in any sort of Microsoft product or any sort of Google product, you can Control Z and it'll send you back to where you were. All right. I'd like to move forward since most of you have a little bit of experience to something that I think is pretty helpful. We very often will get data sets that have like a date of birth or a date in it. And we want to know how many years have passed since then, or how old was that person? How old is that person now? Right. So we're going to ask that question here. You can see that column I've already started for you is current age. And we're going to use the date of birth, right, to discover what this player's current age is. I've already typed the formula in there for you, but I want to talk you through what this is doing. This is a function called dateDiff. And you can see at the beginning of this cell is an equal sign. It says, please compute something. The function is called dateDiff, which is also pretty self-explanatory. The next thing that comes in this string is, where do I want you to compute this? And I've told it column H2, which is where the date of birth lives. I want it to consider that date in comparison to today. So the next argument is today and in parentheses. The third argument that this takes is what I want it to return. I want it to return, in this case, a year. And so to tell Excel or Google Sheets that I want a year, you use a capital Y with parentheses or quote marks around it. And then you close out your parenthesis. All right, do you see what it's doing? What it's returned to you is the year, this person's current age, based on today's date and this date of birth, this date field. Now, as you know, the beauty of spreadsheets is that you only have to type that in once and figure it out once. And now you can apply this down to all the data in your column. You can either click and drag, or you can go to the bottom, as I just did, the bottom right-hand corner of the cell until you get a little dot. Hover your plus sign over it and double click. Super helpful, right? So if for some reason we wanted to return month or day, what changes in this is that last argument, okay, where the Y is. That's where we're telling it how to return this. So let's, if we wanted to know just the month from this date column, we could return that, right? We could do equals month, and then H2 is where our date lives. I'm certain that there are occasions where you could use this. This is kind of a silly example, but I think that those types of functions are really important to remember. And they're on my GitHub page. And yes, please, if you have questions, pop them in the chat. Or if you're lost, or if I'm going too slowly. I want to make sure that you're learning things that you really want to know. Okay. So other helpful functions. We very often get really messy names in data, particularly government data. We'll get columns that have, both first and last name together, and we may want to have those broken apart. So I'm going to show you kind of the quickest and easiest way I know to separate out a first and a last name. I've already started these columns for you. First name and last name. And yes, it's important that you name your columns something that makes sense and that you're going to remember what's in that column. And you do need a field name. Okay, so we have Aaron Bummer here, and I would really like Aaron's first name to be in one column and his last name to be in the last name column. The way that I'm going to do that is by using some functions called right and left, which is going to be pretty self-explanatory here in a second. We're going to combine these directional functions, right and left, with a function that is going to search for something. So just to say this out loud, this is what this function is going to do. It's going to look into cell A2. It's going to start from the left. It's going to find a space in cell A2. And then it's going to return everything before that space. All right. So you can already see the formulas there in B2 right now, but let's go down and type it again. All right. So equals, which means we're going to perform a function. Left, we're going to perform this function from the beginning of the string. We need to tell Google Sheets where to perform the function, and that is in A3. And now we're going to tell it to do something else. We're going to tell it to find something. Find. What we want to search for in this case is a space. So how you represent that in a spreadsheet format is quote mark, space, quote mark. Right? You're telling it to read in between the quote marks, space. We're going to remind it what cell we want it to compute in. That's B3. Oh. What am I writing wrong? Oh, I have too many arguments, guys. What am I doing here? Oops. Okay. My mistake was that I was referring to the cell I was actually in, which was B3, and I want it to look in A3. All right, can you give me a thumbs up if you understood anything I just said to you about this combination left function and find to look for the first occurrence of a space? Oh, yay, great. The first occurrence of a space in there. Ah, Abby asked a great question. What's the advantage of using this instead of split text to columns? Yes, you can do the split text to columns. Where text to columns gets messy is when you have a lot of variance in the way the name is structured. So in this particular data set, it's nice and clean and simple. It's a first name and a last name and nothing else. There's no St. Clair. There's no St. Germain. There's no De La Cruz, right? So we're looking very strictly at a structure that's easy. This is an example of splitting text to columns, just using the automatic function. That would probably work great. When you get into a more complex name, you need to be able to control which pieces you're pulling out, right? So if you did just a split text to columns on my name, on Jennifer Smith Richards, which is actually not hyphenated, you need 3 columns and you'll be blowing out my name across 3 columns. But my last name is Smith Richards. So that's why it's just greater control. It's that if you understand how to do this, then you're not limited by those automatic functions. So, just like any other spreadsheet function, you can copy down your formula. You only have to get it right once, and then you can copy down. So we would go and do the same with last name in theory, right? But this time we're going to use the right function and a combination. This one is more complicated. And a combination of search, which works very similarly to find, and length. So I'm going to read out loud in words what this formula says and what it does. It says, do this function with the equal sign. The function is the right function, which means I want you to start at the right of the string in cell A2. That comma means there's a second argument. I want you to tell me the length of that cell. Consider the length of that cell. How many characters are in it? And then subtract this function. Search for the blank, the space, right? Inside the quote marks, space, inside cell A2. And then return that text to me. So Mr. Bummer here comes right up. And then once again, we can copy down. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time so I can keep moving you forward. This is helpful too when you're trying to extract certain parts of an address. Maybe you just want the zip code, right? And you have a cell that has a full address in it, including zip code. But you want to count something by zip code. So you would want to be able to extract just that zip code, right? And that's what I would use a right and a left function for. Okay, what I think is the most magical thing about spreadsheets is your ability to kind of group and count and aggregate things. And the way that we do that, and by the way, it's not magic, right? This is very intentional and spreadsheets are very literal. So it's doing exactly what you instruct it to do. There's no magic here. It's okay to let people think that you're magic because you can do these things, but really these are very, straightforward commands that you're telling the computer to carry out on your behalf. But I think grouping and aggregating is one of the most helpful things. It's the way that we answer questions from editors like, how often does something happen? How many pitchers are on the White Sox? How many people by position are on the roster this year, right? How many of a certain type of school are there in Chicago Public Schools? So the way that you can most quickly get this done, you could, if you'll cast your memory back to the beginning of our session here, you could sort and filter and eyeball things and say, well, we have this many pitchers on the White Sox. If you look down at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, Google has helpfully counted for you how many you've just highlighted. So it's a quick way to count. Oh, there are 15 pitchers on the roster. Right, there are 2 catchers. You could filter and say, when I filter for catcher, there are 2 catchers. Or you could do this all at once using a pivot table. And if you take nothing else away, like the cleaning formulas and stuff, if that's too much for you, please let this sink in. And again, this stuff is here in the GitHub page. All these formulas are there, and we explain exactly how the formula works. And then pivoting, right? So let's do some pivot tables. As with sorting and filtering, my standard practice is to go and highlight the entire table, right? Because I need the visual cue, personally, that whatever operation I'm doing on the entire spreadsheet and not just a portion of it. Because what happens if you leave a portion of your data out is that Google or Excel will count on what you've selected, right? And you will end up with an inaccurate count, which would suck. All right, so we've highlighted the whole table. This is a recent-ish change to Google Sheets. You now can go to Insert and Pivot Table, and it's going to give you a wording box. It's told you the range that it's considering, which is great. That includes all of our data. And then it gives you an option to either create this pivot table in a new sheet or in the existing sheet. It is best practice to create it in a new sheet. I'm pressing create. And you're going to get this crazy looking thing. What you'll see are rows and values, and then you'll see a list of all of your field names way over here on the right-hand side. Okay. Here in the pivot table editor, you have some options. You have rows, you have columns, you have values, and you have filters. So let's walk through this for a second. If I want to do the most simple thing I can think to do, which is let's count how many of each type of position, each position are on this roster. What I'm going to do is hover over here, and you'll see that your cursor becomes this kind of like directional cursor. That means it's a mover. It's asking you to move it around. So I'm going to take position and drop it over here into rows. Right, you can see that visually things have changed. It's now given you all of the possible position types that are in that column listed over here as rows. All right, now I want to count how many of each of those positions there are in our data set. So I'm going to go back over to our field list over here on the right. And I'm going to grab position again. This time I'm going to drag it down into values and plop it there. So you'll see that you have options under each of these elements over in your pivot table editor. This is where you control the mathematical function that Google Sheets is conducting for you. In this case, it's exactly what I wanted. I wanted it to count how many of each. If this were a different type of different field type, there are other mathematical things I could do on it. I could do average. I could do sum. If you had money here, you could do a sum of the player's salary. You could do an average by position, an average pay. But in this case, it's pretty straightforward, right? So we can see over here now we have 2 catchers, 5 infielders, 6 outfielders, 15 pitchers. You guys give me a signal in the chat if you're with me, please. Thank you, Abby. Thanks, everybody. Okay, good. All right, I'm going to show you one quick trip that will kind of send us down a rabbit hole, but I want to show you this. It's helpful sometimes if really what you need to do is just kind of like eyeball what is in your data set. Let's say I'm like, oh, there are 2 catchers. I thought there were only, I wonder what those are. If you double click on the number, it will pull you a new spreadsheet that it's going to label detail for catcher, and we'll pull the data that's related to just those positions. So you're like, oh, what were the 2 catchers again? And you can pull them up very quickly. I'm going to delete this because we don't really need it. But it's a way to expand out of your pivot table and see what you got. So let's do another. Let's do another one. Let's say we want to know the average. How about the average age by position? Okay. So I'm going to remove positions from the values field. I'm going to keep it right now in rows because I'm trying to say the words out loud here. I want to know something by position. So I've dragged position over to rows. Okay. Current age. I'm now going to snag and drag under values. And you can see right now that Google, not a human, has said, oh, these are numbers. Do you want me to sum these? And we don't. Let's go and click average. We want the average. And now we can see that catchers on the White Sox on average are a little bit older than the rest of the roster. So same thing, David and Paul, who enjoyed the detail blowout. You can double click here too, and it will blow out just that specific data that you're asking it to see. Okay, so this clearly is a very simple data set. We can practice if you want. I can walk through a larger data set. In the practice data that I've listed back here, there are a couple of other practice sheets that are actually a bit larger. This is a really fun one to work on, and again, these are publics, and you can just pull them down at will. This is Chicago Public Schools enrollment over time, right? It's still a pretty simple sheet, but you can practice on a bigger data set that you really can't eyeball all at once. I'll quickly run through this, but I would encourage you again to practice this. The more you use it, the easier it gets. But if I wanted to very quickly tell my editor how many elementary schools and high schools there are in the district, I could say, no problem, editor. I'm going to just do a quick pivot table. I'm going to select the entire thing, go to insert, pivot table, And by the way, I'm working right in the spreadsheet right now, which I shouldn't be doing, but rather than making a copy, but just for the sake of speed here. Oh, we're churning. We're trying. There we go. Okay. I'm going to create a new sheet. All right. So I said I wanted school type, right? Let's just double check. Grade cat. Okay. The grade cat column, I'm going to drag over into rows, right? I want to see the number of schools by grade category. And now I'm going to count the number of appearances that each of those categories make in our data set. And that's what it defaulted to. So you can see that there in this data set are 650 schools, 475 of them are elementary. So if my editor wants to know, I can tell them. You have lots of other settings to play with here. So if I wanted to show these as percentages, I could. Right, I'm over here under the show as, under the values block in the PivotTable editor. We only have one, this is a relatively simple pivot table, right? So that is what I would want to look at it by. If I wanted to make this more complicated, by the way, you can keep clicking and dragging things over. Like, let's say I want to know grade category and school type. I'm going to go back to default. Okay. Now I can see how many traditional or option schools there are by elementary school or by high school. What if I wanted to also, let's try this. This 1819 column is an enrollment number. I just happen to know that already. And theoretically, you would have already explored your data and really understood your data well before you started messing with this. But if I wanted to see the average enrollment at each of these types of schools, I could do that too. One recommendation I have as you're starting to play more with pivot tables, and especially more complex pivot tables, is that you say out loud what it is that you want to do and what it is you want to see, because that will help you as you're dragging those field names over to decide whether this belongs in the values section, something you want to calculate, or if this is the consider this by section. I'm going to show you one last very silly thing because I think we're out of time. Amy, tell me how much time I have left, actually, if you're around. But this is a silly thing that I find. Oh, we have 10 minutes left. Oh, great. Okay. I find this very helpful, and it has nothing to do with anything. It is not some sort of magic thing, except it just saves you a little bit of time. If you want to create a new sheet, are you aware that you can go to Google and just type sheets.new? And it will open up a blank spreadsheet for you when your computer is going fast enough. Yeah, which I think is so incredibly helpful. And if you don't already know this, you can do this for docs too. Docs.new. Yeah, helpful. Right, and then you can go and move it wherever you want to move it. It just basically creates a kind of floating in your drive. Yeah, sheets.new, docs.new, helpful. I'm glad I could share that little piece of fun with you. Let's think, what else would you like to know about pivot tables? Would you like to walk through a couple more? Would you like to see some pivot table pitfalls? If this is super fun for you, pitfalls. Okay. Yeah. So here's one thing I would tell you about spreadsheets in general. If you are working specifically in Excel and you get a data set back from the government and you open it up and it's like exactly 1,043,000, I can't remember exactly what it is, like 243 records. That means that Excel has cut off. So many versions of Excel have a max row limit, and it's just over 1 million records. So if you were to get a spreadsheet back from somebody and it had that very precise, like odd sounding number of records, you should assume that there is more data that you cannot see in Excel. This is less of a problem in Sheets, but it's just a good thing to keep in mind. I have run into this in a real life situation in a newsroom where a reporter got a data set back, opened it up, worked on it in Excel, and then we realized there were actually supposed to be 2 million records and Excel just couldn't see them. So that would be my kind of general pitfall warning. The other thing is empty cells and counting empty cells. So the best example I can think of this is going to be this guy. So I'm going to quickly make a copy. So this data I'm going to open up here. It comes from the FAA. It is actual real. It deals with wildlife strikes and airplanes. It's really cool data, actually. I've never had occasion to use it but in teaching data things, I use this data all the time because it's really fun. Okay, so the FAA keeps this massive data set. This is a limited version that I've kind of sliced up just for practice use. I've limited just to Illinois in this case, but you can see it's quite large, and there are entire columns that are blank, and there are columns that are kind of intermittently filled out. And this is something that you should have taken note of. Let's say you get a data set from a government agency, you would want to take note of kind of what's missing. Where are there blanks? Are there things that I need to observe about this data that would be helpful as I analyze it? So you can see here that if you were to count on some things, you would be counting incomplete columns. Now, why is that a pitfall? You want to, when you're counting records, keep clear in your mind what you're counting. So in the case of the CPS data, we were counting how many occurrences of the elementary school type were in that data. Were we counting the total number of schools in the district for sure? Maybe not. I think in that data set it's true. But in this data set, you wouldn't be getting a count of the total, because your total column, if you were here, let me just show you this. Let's do insert pivot table, new sheet, create. If I wanted to count how many strikes occurred based on time of day, right. So you can see that what I've counted here has one giant blank up here. What I'm counting there are the number of occurrences that had no time of day. So you want to be thoughtful about columns that have blank values and making sure that you are either counting those blank values or counting on a field that you know, oh, come on, count, that you know has a value in it. Google Sheets doesn't automatically exclude null values when it counts them, but Excel sometimes does. And so I'm telling you to be careful what you're counting on, by way of saying you don't want to accidentally exclude the existence of these 267 wildlife strikes where there is no record listed of the time of day that it occurred. I think that's the best I can explain it. You want to make sure that you're not forgetting about unfilled values and blank values. I think that's probably one of the biggest pitfalls. And again, the other one is the one that I've been stressing the whole time, which is making sure that whatever you're calculating, whatever you're working on all of your data and not just a portion of it. You'll notice that when you create a pivot table, I'm trying to get it to move faster for you. If I don't highlight and I go to insert pivot table, right, it has guessed what the complete range of my data set is. But I have also had it guess incorrectly, right? So that's why I like to control for that. Mark asks a good question. When will we use something like R versus Excel or Google Sheets? So I use Google Sheets more often than Excel, in part because I do a lot of collaborations and I want people to be able to easily collaborate on a data set. It does, Excel used to do a bunch of stuff that Google Sheets didn't do, and that no longer really is the case. So I think I use Excel and Google Sheets interchangeably. When I don't use a spreadsheet and do something in R is when I really need it to be, first of all, when it is mathematically or statistically more difficult to do in Excel or Sheets. And second, when it's something I need to be reproducible, in that I need someone else to be able to look at the code and see my logic and see my steps and reproduce it. Also, it's like a favor to myself. So something that I'm going to be doing over and over and over, I don't want to have to manually do in Excel or Google Sheets. I'm going to want to be able to just like write a little bit of programming and run it versus going through 10 steps in Excel or spreadsheet. You guys have other questions? Anything at all? I'm going to stop sharing and you can talk to my face. Anything at all, please. You got nothing? Yeah, reach me. Oh, heck yeah. I can walk you through stories that have used data. You can reach me by email at jrichards@chicagotribune.com. I'm on Twitter at jsmithrichards. And all this is, if you look on that GitHub page, look at the bottom of the README file, you'll see my contact info. And you should feel free to reach out to me. Almost every, this is for an answer to Rachel about a time I've used data analysis in a story. Almost every story I do uses data analysis. I can walk you through. I have something that's getting ready to come out not too long from now that's based on data analysis. The most recent project I worked on was about seclusion and restraint in schools. And we actually took records and built a spreadsheet, a database out of those records, where we were logging the characteristics of seclusions and restraint that had happened in public schools in Illinois. We ended up with like 35,000 records of seclusion or physical restraint. And then we used that to talk about how frequent those practices were across the state. And it was something that had never been looked at before because nobody had been tracking it. So I use a lot of, basic spreadsheet skills to collect records and then track characteristics, within those records to be able to count something, right? It's really like simple in its essence. So I want to count how many times something is happening and how many times certain characteristics are a part of that. If you have things that you need help with, I'm glad to help. Also, I would recommend highly Matt Kiefer, who popped in at the beginning of the session. Also really good with data. But yeah, if you need help, please reach out. Please. Oh, that's a great point, Mike. Yeah, there are really good resources there with SBJ. Yeah. Do ed reporters share their FOIA data in an archive somewhere? Oh, wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, that would be really nice. No, but I will say that there are lots of education. There's so much education data out there that that you'll see education specific sessions at IRE and here at FOIA Fest. Sometimes you'll see all kinds of education specific groups like Education Writers Association, where people can share good resources for data. They can and do share good resources. Yeah, I hope this was helpful, everyone. It's really hard to not see your faces, I have to say. But I hope you can go out and use your data, use your new superpower, not magic. Thank you.